When the voice burst out, "It is finished," the entire hill of Golgotha fell silent. The sky had been covered in darkness for 3 hours already, not a single star visible even though it was midday. I was standing under the cross, my legs were trembling and weak. I looked up at the teacher's face, and I saw clearly the last breath escape from his face, which was covered in blood and sweat. His head fell forward, and at that moment the ground began to shake. "My name is John. I was the youngest of Jesus' disciples, and he was called the disciple whom the teacher loved. But if I were to tell this story now, it would seem I should begin on that day at Golgotha. But in fact, I think it all began much earlier. I would like to take you to that very beginning. At the moment when the teacher bowed his head on the cross, his mother, Mary, was standing next to me. She was weeping silently, and I could tell from the shaking of her shoulders how much pain she was in. Just before he died, the teacher looked at me and said, "Woman, behold your son." And to me, he said, "Behold your mother." His voice was broken and feeble, but it seemed to penetrate deep into my heart. Roman soldiers surrounded him, and one of them, a centurion, looked up to heaven and muttered, "Truly this man was the Son of God." I could not believe that an enemy soldier, a Roman soldier, could make such a confession. The earth continued to shake, and later news came that the veil in the most holy place in the temple in Jerusalem had been torn from top to bottom. The thick curtain that separated God and man had been torn in two. But I didn't realize at the time what that meant. I just sat there. My knees touched the ground, and the stones and dirt were wet. The teacher's blood had flowed down the cross and soaked the ground. The smell of blood reached my nose, and I heard thunder in the distance. I couldn't raise my head. I couldn't understand how the person I'd been by my side for 3 years, the person who had walked on water and raised the dead, could die so tragically. But to tell this story properly, we need to go back a few days. On that night when everything began to fall apart, in the attic where the Passover meal was held. I was born near the Sea of Galilee. My father, Zebedee, was a fisherman. And my older brother, James, and I grew up on boats, mending nets from a young age. The mornings in Galilee were truly beautiful. As the sun rose, a golden glow poured over the lake, and the fish leapt out of the water, their silver scales glittering. My mother Salome baked barley bread every morning, and I was happy when the smell of the bread filled the house. Our village was a small fishing village not far from Bethsaida, and most people lived by fishing or farming. We gathered in the synagogue to read the Torah, and every time I heard about the Messiah who would save Israel, my heart raced. Everyone believed that when he came, they would be free from Roman oppression, and I, too, eagerly awaited that day. It was during those ordinary days that I first met Jesus. When Andrew, a disciple of John the Baptist, ran to me and shouted, "I have found the Messiah." But the moment I met the carpenter's son from Nazareth, my life changed completely. There was an indescribable depth in the teacher's eyes, as if they held eternity. At the word, "Follow me," I let down my nets, and my brother James also got out of the boat with me. I still remember my father's surprised face, but he still didn't stop us. 3 years passed like a dream. Every day with you was a miracle, and each day was filled with new teachings. At the wedding feast in Cana, I saw water turn into wine, and I witnessed 5,000 people being fed with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. When the widow's son of 9 rose from the coffin, I got goosebumps, but you smiled. I think that nothing had contained the secret of the kingdom of God. Peter, James, and I were the 3 disciples that you especially took with you. On the Mount of Transfiguration, we saw your face shining like the sun. And we also witnessed Moses and Elijah appear and talk to you." At that time, a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son." A voice rang out, saying, "Listen to him," and the three of us fell to the ground in fear. Even though I had such an amazing experience, I didn't understand what the teacher meant when he said that I had to carry the cross. The teacher said many times, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected, be killed, and after 3 days rise again." But we turned a deaf ear to these words. The Messiah would die, I thought. Impossible. In fact, I expected that he would become king when he went up to Jerusalem, and my brother James. And I even asked to sit on your right and left. Thinking back now, I can't believe how foolish we were. As Passover drew near, the atmosphere in Jerusalem became increasingly plotting to kill you, and after you raised Lazarus from the dead, their murderous intent became even more blatant. When you entered the temple and overturned the tables of the merchants, I read the murderous intent in the eyes of the religious leaders. I thought I could hear their teeth gnashing. On the evening before Passover, the teacher told me to prepare dinner with my brother Peter. It was an upper room within the walls of Jerusalem. Inside the room was a long table and a lamp burning softly with olive oil. All 12 disciples were gathered there, and the teacher himself poured water into a basin and began to wash our feet. When Peter refused to wash his disciples' feet, saying, "Absolutely not," the teacher gently said, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." At that moment, the air in the room became heavy, and I felt the teacher's expression gradually darkening. He broke the bread and said, "This is my body given for you." He took the cup of wine and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." I looked at his hands, which were trembling slightly as he broke the bread. "One of you will betray me." At these words, the room froze. The disciples looked at each other and asked one after another, "Lord, it is not I, is it?" I was leaning against the teacher's bosom. So I asked quietly, "Lord, who is it?" The teacher dipped a piece of bread and gave it to Judas Iscariot, saying, "What you are doing, do quickly." Judas took the bread and disappeared into the night. It seemed as if darkness had swallowed him. After dinner, the teacher spoke to us a lot. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you," he said, his voice filled with the sadness of separation. He also said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." He told the parable of the vine and urged them, "Abide in me, and I in you." Looking back now, those words were like the last will and testament. As we headed to the Garden of Gethsemane, the night wind was cold, swayed in the wind, and moonlight filtered through the leaves. The teacher took Peter, James, and me inside and said to us, "My soul is deeply sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and keep watch with me." I saw fear on my teacher's face for the first time, and it scared me even more. The teacher went a stone's throw away, knelt down, and fell to the ground, while I watched from behind the olive tree. "Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup from me. But not as I will, but as you will." The sound of that prayer reached my ears through the night air, but my voice was hoarse. I tried to keep my eyes open, but I was so tired that my eyelids kept drooping. When the master came back and asked, "Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour?" The master went away and prayed again. I was too embarrassed to raise my head. According to Luke the physician, his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. It never occurred to me that the Son of God could suffer so much, but it was only later that I understood its meaning. When he returned from the third prayer, a determined look appeared on his face. The fear was still there, but a peace seemed to cover it. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us go. Behold, he who betrays me is at hand. At that moment, a large crowd was seen coming from the entrance to the garden, with torches flashing. Judas was leading the way. Behind him, the temple guards and Roman soldiers sent by the high priests followed with swords and clubs. Judas approached the teacher and called him, Rabbi, and kissed him, which was the signal for his companion of 3 years had betrayed him with a kiss. And the teacher said calmly, Friend, do what you came for. Peter, the older brother, drew his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant, Malchus. The teacher said to him, Put your sword back in its place. Will I pray and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? How then could the scriptures be fulfilled that it must happen this way? He touched Malchus's ear and healed it. I was speechless at the sight of him healing even the wounds of his enemies, and all his disciples ran away. I ran away too. It's embarrassing, but it was true. For 3 years, we had shouted, I will die for the Lord. But at that very moment, we were scattered into the darkness. Peter followed from afar, but in the end, he denied knowing you 3 times. When the rooster crowed, Peter's wailing filled the night sky. After running away, that cry has never been erased inside the walls of Jerusalem. My whole body trembled, and fear and shame alternately weighed on me. I couldn't sleep all night, but the teacher's last words lingered in my head. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. I tried to hold on to those words, but the fear was too great. The teacher was interrogated in the house of the high priest Caiaphas, and condemned to death by the Sanhedrin on the charge of blasphemy, on the pretext that he had said, I am the Son of God. I gritted my teeth and clenched my fists, but I couldn't do anything. When I heard that he had been brought before the Roman governor Pilate, I gathered my courage and went outside. The streets of Jerusalem were bustling with people for the Passover, and a crowd had gathered in front of the governor's palace. Pilate found no guilt in you and wanted to release you for the Passover. But the crowd, stirred up by the chief priests, cried out, Crucify him! The shouts echoed off the walls of Jerusalem, and it felt like someone's head was split open. The scourging began. The Roman whip had a piece of lead or bone attached to the end, and each blow tore flesh. After receiving 39 lashes, your back was left unrecognizable. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns and pressed it onto your head. But the thorns pricked your forehead and blood flowed down your face. They dressed him in purple and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! But he did not say a word. As the prophet Isaiah had prophesied, like a lamb led to the slaughter, he opened not his mouth. He carried the cross and walked toward Golgotha. But his body, beaten by the whip, could not bear the heavy wood. Simon of Cyrene was forced to carry the cross in his place, and he walked staggering. There were women following him in the street weeping. But he turned and said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Even in such suffering, he was a man who cared for others. When they arrived at Golgotha, Roman soldiers drove nails into his hands and feet. Every time the hammer struck the nailhead, there was a dull thud like iron digging into bone. I covered my ears, but the sound squeezed through my fingers. The cross was erected, and his body hung in the air. 2 criminals were crucified on either side of him. He was crucified from 9 in the morning, and had to endure the pain for 6 hours. Crucifixion was the cruelest punishment the Romans had ever devised. They had to support their weight on their nailed hands. and pushed themselves up with their nailed feet to breathe, the wounds on their backs scraping against the rough wood. Very slow death. The Master spoke 7 words on the cross, and the first one completely broke me. Father, they do not know what they are doing. I wondered if it was humanly possible for him to ask forgiveness for those who were crucifying him. One of the criminals hanging next to him mocked him, saying, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other criminal pleaded with him, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." The teacher promised him, "Today you will be with me in paradise," and even on the cross, he opened the door to salvation. The sky suddenly began to darken. The sun lost its light, and darkness covered the whole earth. For 3 hours the darkness continued, and people murmured in fear, and some fled, saying that God had turned his face away, unable to bear to see the suffering of his son. I later realized that around 3 p.m., the teacher shouted loudly, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? My God, why have you forsaken me?" That scream echoed throughout Golgotha, the loneliest sound between heaven and earth. The moment he took on all of humanity's sins, his fellowship with God the Father was severed. The Son, who had been one with the Father from eternity, was abandoned because of our sins. The teacher's lips were parted and he said, "I am thirsty." The soldier soaked a sponge in wine vinegar and tied it to a stick and placed it to his lips. And then he said his final words, "It is finished." Those 3 letters, tetelestai, in Greek, weren't just final words. They were an expression used when everything was paid on a debt document. A declaration that humanity's debt to God for sin had been completely paid. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." With these words, he bowed his head and breathed his last. At that moment, the earth shook and the rocks split. It was later discovered that the veil of the temple had been torn from top to bottom, permanently breaking down the barrier between God and man. I cried while supporting Mary under the cross, and the sky was still dark. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the council, went to Pilate and asked for the body of the Master. Although he was a secret disciple, he seemed to have shaken off his fear for a moment. Nicodemus also came and brought about 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes. They anointed the Master's body with spices and wrapped it in linen, as was customary among the Jews. He laid the Master in a new tomb hewn out of the rock, and rolled a large stone against the entrance. During the Sabbath, I hid in the upper room with the other disciples. We locked the doors and closed the windows, for we were afraid that the Jews would come for us too. The room was filled with despair, and no one spoke. Peter sat in a corner, staring at the wall, and Thomas just hung his head and sighed. It felt like 3 years of dreams had been shattered, and the Messiah was dead. I could not accept it. Early in the morning after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and ran back, shouting breathlessly, "Lord, take me out of the tomb." I took it, but I don't know where I put it. I was young and arrived first. I ran with my brother Peter. And when I looked inside the tomb from the entrance, there was only a semaphore lying there. The towel that had been wrapped around the head was folded separately and placed on one side. If it were a grave robber, he would not have left it in such an orderly manner. Peter followed and went into the tomb, and I went in too. And I saw and believed. That evening, as we were gathered in the attic again and locked the door wouldn't open, suddenly appeared in the middle of the room and said, "Peace be with you." I couldn't believe my eyes. But the teacher showed me his hands and side. The nail marks were clear, and the wound in his side where the spear had pierced was still there. He was not a ghost, but a resurrected body. Joy erupted in the room, and the disciples cried, laughed, and knelt before their teacher. Thomas, who was not there at the time, came later and declared, "Unless I see the mark of the nails and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. 8 days later. The teacher appeared again and said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands, and reach out your hand and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing." Thomas knelt down and confessed, "And
My
at
Lord
that
and my
moment,
God."
you could see the chain of doubt completely
For
broken.
40
days, the teacher appeared to us many times. When we returned empty-handed from fishing in the Sea of Galilee, he said to us, "Cast your net on the right side of the boat," and we caught 153 fish. On the shore, he lit a charcoal fire, grilled fish, and fed us breakfast. In front of the charcoal fire, he asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" He gave Peter, who had denied him 3 times, 3 chances for
Peter
restoration.
answered
Weeping, "Lord, you know everything, you know that I love you." The teacher restored his mission by saying, "Feed my sheep." On the day of his ascension, on the Mount of Olives, the teacher left his last words, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." And before our very eyes he was taken up into heaven, and we looked up until a cloud hid him from us. 2 angels in white appeared and said, "This same Jesus will come back in the same way you saw him go into heaven." That promise is still engraved in my heart. Now I am old. My hair has turned white like snow, and my steps have slowed down. I heard that most of the other disciples were martyred. My older brother James was killed by Herod with a sword, and my older brother Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. Paul was beheaded, and Andrew died on an X-shaped cross. I was the only one left, and it seemed that God had given me another mission. When I was exiled to the island of Patmos, the Lord appeared to me in a vision. He was no longer suffering on the cross. His eyes were like a flame of fire, his feet like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice like the sound of many waters. "Do not be afraid, I am the first and the last. I am the living one, and I was dead. Behold, I am the one who lives
He
and
said,
was dead. I am alive forever and ever and have the keys of death and Hades." At that moment, I felt with my whole body the fear of Golgotha turning into the joy of victory. As I tell you this story, there's one thing I can tell you for sure. The words he cried out on the cross that day, "It is finished," were truly a declaration that everything had been accomplished. The chains of sin that had bound humanity since Adam were broken, and the power of death was broken. The tearing of the temple curtain meant that anyone could now approach God directly. And the empty tomb was proof that death was not the end. For 3 years, I was with Jesus, witnessing miracles, hearing teachings, and experiencing love. But the culmination of it all was the cross. A greater miracle than walking on water, feeding the 5,000, or raising Lazarus from the dead was accomplished on the cross. God became a man, took on the sins of mankind, died, and rose again after 3 days. This was the greatest love for all mankind. I always say this to the young saints who are like my grandsons, "Dear children, love one another. As the teacher loved us, we must love one another." It was a truth I realized throughout my life. The cross was not a symbol of judgment, but a symbol of love, and that love is flowing toward you even at this very moment. I feel like I will see you again soon. I am not afraid. No, I am even because excited. I know that you will embrace me once again with those nail-marked hands. You too will meet your teacher on that day, and he will call your name and say, "Well done." He will say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I will end my story with these words: "So loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." This was the meaning of the cross. This was the gospel. This was the story I have dedicated my life to telling. The words that said it was finished, those were also words for you.